So today we're going to be watching the Fat Electrician's video, Crossing a Frozen River on Christmas, How George Washington Saved the American Revolution. And just from the thumbnail, I can tell that it's about Washington crossing the Delaware. I don't really know a whole lot about it, except that it happened. And of course, I've seen the famous painting, as he's shown right here. So I am very curious to see what happens. And as always, those watching on stream right now, the link I am putting in the chat right now. Those watching after the fact will find it in the video description. So please do go support the original creator. We always appreciate the original creators around here. Without them, this video would not exist. I do like the Fat Electrician. We watched one of his videos last week, so this will be another fun one. I'm excited to see it. And I will just say that for those watching after the fact, this is after a very long video we just reacted to, which you've seen it a couple days ago. If that's the case, just look at the timestamp on that. You'll see how that went. So I am a little tired and my voice is a little bit tired as well. And I had a few beers during the course of that stream, so I'm feeling a little toasty right now as well, which is, you know, knowing the Fat Electrician, he would probably improve. He would probably strongly approve. So yeah. We'll just roll with it. Let's go. Just a quick reminder that you're watching the Highlights channel right now. If you want to catch these streams live or want to check out my more high-effort analytical content, consider checking out the main channel linked in the description.
Ah yes, my favorite Christmas story. Today we're talking about George Washington crossing the Delaware. Yes, like the painting. We've all seen the painting. We've all seen the internet memes like America will cross a frozen river on Christmas to kill you in your sleep. Haha, that's funny. What's not funny is the fact that everybody knows the painting, but almost nobody knows the full story.
Yeah, I will say, granted, I don't know the story really at all. I know he crossed the Delaware. I know the Hessians were involved. That's about it. I mean, I've crossed the Delaware myself. There's a bridge there, so I've done that, but yeah, I don't know the actual full story.
It's a metaphor.
I get it.
But that actually happened, though.
And the reason that's a tragedy is because while the painting is cool, the painting doesn't convey the message that Washington didn't just cross the Delaware River while it was frozen. He crossed it on 3 separate occasions, handed out 3 separate ass whoopings, and saved the entire American Revolution. And it is probably the 10 most important days in American history. And we're
Another interesting thing is that I find this very fascinating just because one thing I've learned about George Washington is that he was like a really great leader, but he was not a great general. So it's interesting to see that these 3 operations spearheaded by him actually were really, really useful. So that's kind of neat.
We're going to get to all of it right after word from our sponsor. This video is brought to you by Supremacy World War III, a free online military strategy game where you can play against other people. You can pick your country and then go to war with the rest of the world, or they have America only mode where you can pick a...
And again, just the regular caveat, I don't know this game, so this is not my endorsement. This is just Fat Electrician's endorsement. Maybe the game is great, maybe it's not. I don't know, just don't attach my name to it.
State inside the United States and go to war with all of the other states, which is usually what I like to do. I like to play Iowa because I'm from Iowa, and then I like to attack Minnesota for obvious reasons.
Banter.
No, it's not banter.
It's not banter, not now.
But lately I've been playing as America, and my opening attack is obviously against the British because it's December and nothing makes me want to watch The Grinch and cross a frozen river on Christmas to fight British people like the holiday season. But it gets even better because if you use my link down below, you're going to automatically unlock a bunch of freebies, including a special weapon, the railgun. Which, I mean, let's face it, now we're just playing on easy mode. We already beat the British with muskets and cannons, and now we've got railguns. They don't stand a chance. If George Washington would have had one of these bad boys, they probably would have thought twice about putting a tax on tea. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, go check out Supremacy World War III. It's free to play. The link's down below. Let's get back to the video.
I always like Fat Electrician's ad reads. I think they're very good.
Our story begins in December of 1776. George Washington is currently leading the Continental Army, and things are not going well. They have suffered loss after loss after loss at the hands of the British. They've lost New York. They've lost Long Island. They've lost Fort Washington. They've lost Fort Lee, and they are now being driven out of New Jersey. All that remains of the Continental Army at this point is about 2,400 men. They are beat up. They are freezing. They are starving, and they've lost almost all of their supplies in their previous losses, and they are now being forced to retreat across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania to desperately try to stop the British from taking Philadelphia.
Yeah, and let's not forget also at the time, Philadelphia was the capital. We didn't have Washington, D.C. at the time, so it's important that we don't lose Philadelphia at the time. I will say, it is one of those things. It is kind of insane that we ended up winning the American Revolution, even despite the fact that the British had to send troops over the sea. it was such an uneven fight, so it is fucking ridiculous that it ended the way it did.
And if that wasn't bad enough, the army is about to not exist because on December 30th at midnight, all of the enlistments for all of the men in the Continental Army expire, and most of them are probably going to go home because they're tired of getting their asses kicked, which means the American Revolution is going to dissolve and it's game over. We remain British forever.
Well, that sounds terrible.
It is terrible.
And the
Archer's
British
another great
realize
show.
this, so they decide they're not going to attack Philadelphia. They decide it's the fourth quarter, they're up by 100 points. They're just going to take a knee, let the clock run out, and win the game. There's no reason for them to march south, have one last fight with Washington, and take Philadelphia because the American Revolution is dying just fine on its own. So the top British generals, General Howe and General Cornwallis, order their men to go into winter quarters. General Cornwallis makes plans to go back home to Britain to spend winter with his wife, and General Howe is going to go up to New England and spend winter with his mistress. Okay, the British, obviously the bad guys in
makes
this story,
sense.
but you got to give it to them. That's a brilliant plan, right? You get to go home, be warm, get a piece of ass, and still win.
I'll make that deal.
What their plan did not account for was that a 6'2" giant by the name of George Washington was about to make the decision that he was going to be the main character of the American Revolution.
And let's also not forget that this is, 1700s, the late 1700s, but the 1700s nonetheless. People were on average a little bit shorter than they are today. So him being, I don't remember if he said 6'2" or 6'3". That's tall by today's standards. That's even taller back then.
Was about to have his Rocky moment where he decides nothing's over till it's over. But the clock is ticking. Right now it's about December 8th and he's got till December 31st at midnight to figure out a way to get all of his men to not abandon their enlistments, to remain in the army, build an army over the course of the next winter, and then take the fight back to the British. And to make things 10 times worse, pretty much everybody has given up on him. Continental Congress is pissed off at his string of losses. All of the other top generals in the Continental Army are secretly going behind his back, telling Congress that they should be his replacement.
And again, that's from what I've heard, George Washington was not the best general. As much as he was great at kind of inspiring morale, inspiring the troops, and that he was, a very well-beloved leader, as a military tactician, he was supposedly not very good.
And they're talking about firing George Washington. They've basically already decided they're going to let the British plan work. They're going to let the clock run out. They're going to let the American military dissolve. And then they're going to hope in the spring, everybody will have forgotten that they've just had their ass beat for the last 6 months straight. And they'll be able to raise a new army, put somebody else in charge of it, and they're going to go fight the British. But George Washington knows the people aren't going to forget. This revolution is going to die right here, right now, if he can't do something about it. And this is the lowest point of George Washington's life. In his own writings, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says, I want to quit. I wish I could quit, but I know if I quit, nobody else is going to take up my spot and do what needs to be done right here, right now.
And on top of that, if the revolution fails, he's probably getting hanged. Like they're obviously not going to hang everyone who fought in the Continental Army, but the military leaders for sure, as well as the politicians of the new United States, yeah, they're all getting hanged. So George Washington probably had an additional motivator of not just this is what I know to be right, but also I don't want to die.
He knows that he's the dad. He is a father to a new nation, and quitting is a luxury that he doesn't have. So he gets to work and he comes up with a plan. George Washington decides that somehow, someway, before December 31st at midnight, he needs to get a win. He needs to get a win so he can capture enemy supplies, and more importantly, he can get his men and the revolution as a whole some morale. He needs to prove to himself, his men, and the whole world that the British military is not invincible and that they can be beat. And then maybe...
Yeah, and well, I mean, for those of you in the audience who play video games, you'll know that a lot of times they'll treat like happiness or morale as a resource. But there's actually more truth to that than you would think. Like, a lot of times, it's not pure tactical value that determines a military operation. A lot of times it can be like, hey, we need to keep them excited. We need to get them wanting to win. We need to get them to believe in our cause. And that can be, a win does that, even if it doesn't have a whole lot of tactical value. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of times war heroes get pulled off of the front lines, because they know that they're very good for morale, and if they die, that would be really bad for morale, even if they get a lot out of it. So, yeah, that's an interesting factor that not a lot of people really consider.
just maybe his men will re-enlist and he can keep the revolution alive. He can turn this from a fourth quarter situation to a halftime situation, and he can come out of this winter with a bigger, better army that's ready to take the fight to the British. But in order to accomplish that, he's going to have to change everything. Up until this point in the war, George Washington has led a very conservative, defensive-minded war. He's going to have to flip that on its head. He is going to have to get aggressive and go out on the offense.
Yeah, and I'm not too familiar with the exact tactical situation of the American Revolution, but I do know that the Americans are vastly outgunned by the British, even though the British have to send everything overseas. Just because the British, let's not forget, they had the most powerful navy in the world at the time, and they're just a major superpower in the world. So honestly, leading a mostly defensive war makes sense for the most part, because essentially if you can keep having the enemy throw themselves at you and just continually wear them down, and as long as you continue to take fewer casualties than they do, eventually you'll come out on top. That makes sense. But also, if you lose, that's going to cause problems, and sometimes aggressive action is needed. So that's what it seems like is the case here.
He is no longer going to be the general sitting up on the hill overlooking the battlefield issuing orders. He is going to be on the front lines with his men, leading them in combat the entire time, because that's the only way his men are going to follow him. With that in mind, he decides they're going to go
and
to
that's
the nearest
another
British
big thing. That's how Napoleon actually ended up gaining a lot of the respect of his troops, is that yes, he was a great tactician, yes, he was a great leader, but he had a unit of people, his army was willing to die for him because they respected him and cared for him that much. One of the reasons was that when the fighting began, he was out there. He was loading the cannons himself. He was getting mud all over him. He commanded respect because he was out there with the soldiers. So that's an important thing, the fact that George Washington is essentially leading this particular charge.
Outpost. They are going to launch an attack and they are going to crush them there, steal all the supplies, and get this victory. But that's easier said than done, because the nearest British outpost is a town called Trenton in New Jersey, so they're going to have to recross the Delaware River when it's borderline frozen in winter, when the men are already freezing, starving, and beat up. So the journey alone is a humongous ask, and even if they can make it to Trenton, once they get there, the problem only gets worse because it's occupied by 1,500 Hessians. And the Hessians are German mercenaries hired by...
That mustache, man, that's an aesthetic for sure. And wait, okay, this is gonna bug me. I understand this is just because of the painting itself and not because of any actual reflection of reality, but like, what the fuck is he doing with his hand right there? He looks like he's like holding a baby in here, like an invisible baby. Because I don't know what else it's supposed to do. Is it supposed to be like that he's holding the butt of his rifle with that hand? Because that would kind of make sense. Wouldn't be completely accurate, but it would make sense. And granted, look at the other hands in this painting. They don't look particularly good. Hands and feet are traditionally difficult things to paint, so that's one of the reasons you'll see a lot of people be painted with their hands like behind their backs or something like that, is because painting your hand is very difficult. And it's clearly the case here, but I don't know, maybe he's kind of grabbing the hammer of the gun, but not really. I don't know. That's just fucking with me.
They are basically the Blackwater of their day. They are the world's premier soldiers for hire. They are in every way professionals, and good ones at that. The Continental Army, on the other hand, is a bunch of average Joes that picked up muskets one day. They don't know how to march. They don't know how to fight that great, but they're willing to fight. It is quite literally pros versus Joes, and to make things worse, the Joes are freezing, starving, and low on supplies, and the Hessian pros are not. They are the exact opposite. This is borderline impossible. If they're gonna pull this off, they're gonna need a Christmas miracle, which is exactly why we're gonna attack on Christmas.
Yeah, that's another morale decision where, you know, getting the big victory is a morale boost. Getting it on an important day is another morale boost.
Kind of loosey-goosey.
Also, the live-action Grinch, I will die on the hill that it's actually a great movie, a lot of fun. It's not the same as the, you know, original Dr. Seuss story or the animated adaptation, which is a much more faithful adaptation. Sorry, but Jim Carrey Grinch is so much fun. It is definitely something you should not skip.
All right, so it's decided. We're attacking Trenton on Christmas, so we got to get a plan together. First things first, we got to be able to transport all the men and all the cannons across the river as quickly as possible. And in order to do that, we're going to need as many boats as possible. Luckily, the Delaware River is used for commerce, so there's these things called Durham boats that a lot of farmers and businesses that operate on the river already own. And these boats are capable of carrying a huge quantity of weight because they're usually used for carrying like iron ore or crops. So if we can get our hands on those, we'll be able to transport large quantities of men and cannons across the river as quickly as possible, and they're already along the river. So George Washington orders his guys to go out weeks in advance and track down all the farmers, all the businesses that own these Durham boats, and first they need to ask if they can borrow them. If they're not going to let the Continental Army borrow them, they're going to ask them if they can buy them, and if they can't buy them, we're just going to steal that shit. We're going to strategically transfer that shit to our location.
Yeah, I will say one thing is I don't own any of
we're just going to steal that.
Any of Fat Electrician's merch. But his merch looks actually really good. Like, from what I've seen, it's actually pretty high quality. So, if there was a YouTuber I was going to buy merch from, it would probably be his. Because, you know, it's just fun. And also, it is the strategy I would want to do for my own merch if I had merch. Which is something that is connected to my own content, but is not necessarily obviously branded as my own content, because, you know, essentially if I was going to sell merch, I'd want it to be something that people would feel comfortable wearing in public. Wouldn't want it to be, you know, just as a show of support. But yeah.
Shit, we're going to strategically transfer that shit to our location. Okay, not really that great. It's not good for, you know, the whole hearts and minds, and we want everybody on our side to think we're the good guys thing, but our back is up against the wall. It has to be done. We need these boats. If we can't buy them and we can't borrow them, we're going to fucking steal them. So the men go out, they acquire the boats. Okay, now for the actual plan, how we're going to conduct this battle. We are going to go there. We are going to leave at night. We are going to cross the frozen Delaware River with giant chunks of ice floating down it in these Durham boats in the dark, and then we're going to march 9 miles to Trenton and hopefully get there before the sun is up and we can still attack him at night. And because it's Christmas, hopefully all the Hessians have been partying and drinking and we can catch them when they're drunk, off guard, and just slaughter everybody.
That's also, it seems to be a surprisingly common factor in older warfare, is if you can reliably guess when the opposing army is going to be drunk, then you're probably going to be able to take advantage of that.
That's the plan. Okay, this is not going to be conventional warfare. We're not going to march to Trenton, then form up in ranks on the outskirts of town in a field and wait for the Hessians to come out and form up their ranks and fight like they do, where we all just stand in the field and take shots at each other. No, we are going to rush into the town with our 6-foot-tall Kentucky rifles and start doing CQB guerrilla warfare tactics.
Yeah. And that is another factor in why the American Revolution was successful, is that warfare at the time was kind of a case of you line up, the other person lines up, and you just kind of take shots at each other in volleys. And that, you know, the British always succeeded in that altercation just because they had the biggest army with the most people, and they just had the resources to make that work for them. However, the United States, or, you know, the Continental Army at the time, used guerrilla tactics, which in general, guerrilla tactics work really well against conventional warfare. But also, it's another way of doing war that the British were not comfortable with. They weren't accustomed to. So we were able to disproportionately affect them. And that's one of the reasons why the revolution was successful.
That's the plan. I know what you're thinking. If we're just doing a bunch of close quarters combat inside of an urban environment, why are we bothering to bring a bunch of cannons with us? Surely cannons won't be good for CQB, right? Wrong, because we've got Henry Knox, you know, like Fort Knox where they keep all the gold. Yeah, that guy. He's George Washington's chief of artillery, and he's about to revolutionize how cannons are used in combat. Henry Knox is about to write the playbook for CQB cannon warfare, which shouldn't even be a thing.
That's an amazing sentence. CQB cannon warfare. I mean, to be fair, getting shot by a cannon at close range probably isn't a very fun experience, but still.
Get a CQB AT4, which is pretty sweet.
Wait, hold on, time out. Fuck on.
Because usually cannons are just, you know, you put them up on the hill, they shoot at the enemy from far away. That's how they're used. That's what artillery is at this point in time. Henry Knox, however, isn't going to have his one big artillery battery up on the hill. He's going to take his men that man the cannon, he's going to take them and the cannon, and he's going to attach them to different infantry units, and they are going to roll into town with the infantry, and every time they hit a major crossroads or a choke point, the cannon is going to set up there, and they're going to hold that crossroads and that choke point with the cannon. And
Okay, so it's basically acting like almost like a defensive machine gun nest, how that would be used in like World War II, where it's not meant to essentially be its own like front-facing weapon, or not a weapon to be, you know, pushed forward, but as like to hold a checkpoint. That's interesting, because again, we have used things like that in future wars. So this is kind of how that started. That's very, very interesting to me.
they're going to be using canister shot, which is basically a burlap sack full of a bunch of tiny cannonballs, essentially turning it into a giant fucking shotgun.
Oh, so grape shot,
and we all know
basically.
shotguns are the best for CQB.
Pistols put holes in people. Rifles put holes through people. Shotguns at the right range with the right load will physically remove a chunk of shit off your opponent and throw that shit on the floor.
So
well, there's also kind of to put what he just said into kind of more normal terms. My understanding of things is that, you know, the typical cannonball is kind of designed, you know, basically a big sphere of metal. It's generally designed to do structural damage. Like if you're on a ship, welcome back, Alan. So if you're on a ship, the cannonball essentially blows a hole in the hull of the ship. And if you're doing it in warfare, it blows a hole in the army, or it blows a hole in a wall, or it blows a hole in a building. But if you do what, I don't remember what he just called it, but essentially grape shot, that is not going to have as much penetrating force, so it's not going to destroy a structure, but it'll tear the fuck out of a person. So that's kind of my understanding of how this works, where they're essentially loading the cannons with shot that's designed to eviscerate people, not necessarily to damage structures.
Henry Knox and his artillery boys are going to be going in attached to the main assault element that is led by George Washington himself. There's also going to be two other elements of this attack. And the second element is absolutely critical for mission success because there's a Delaware River going down, Trenton is right here, and then there's a little creek that peels off the Delaware River called the Assunpink Creek.
Come again.
And to answer your question, yes, it is taking an enormous amount of self-control not to make a joke about the name of this creek. Anyways, moving on. In order for this mission...
I respect the acknowledgement. That's one thing. Like, he knows that what he's saying. He knows what he's thinking. I can appreciate that he's got the balls to actually just admit it.
To succeed, they need to take control of this bridge immediately and cut it off, because if the Hessians are able to get all their men and get them across the bridge, they'll be able to form up, and then there's one giant choke point, and then it's just going to be a slugfest, and the Americans are probably not going to win because they're going to have to run across a bridge to get to the Hessians, or the Hessians are just going to retreat, go to the nearest town, and come back with a ton of reinforcements. And the problem George Washington faces with this is there's not a lot of people capable of leading this force that he also actually trusts, because the vast majority of high-ranking officers in the Continental Army at this point in time are politically hostile to George Washington, and they're running off to Congress trying to steal his job. Really, the only big names that are super loyal to George Washington himself are Henry Knox, who has to be with George Washington, and Nathaniel Greene, the fighting Quaker, aka his right-hand guy, and he also needs him with the main...
Fighting Quaker is interesting. I imagine there's an interesting story behind that guy, because for those who don't know, the Quakers, kind of the thing they're known for is that they're pacifists. Like, during the lead up to the Civil War, one thing the Quakers were known for doing is they were very anti-slavery. They would actually buy up slaves to free them. Like, they really did not like conflict, war, anything like that. They were like one of the most peaceful religious sects you could think of. So the fact that when you can get a peaceful religious person to fight, that's fucking crazy.
Assault force, so he needs somebody that he can trust that's going to lead these men in combat. So he turns to John Sullivan. Now, John Sullivan and George Washington definitely have their differences. They don't necessarily like each other. They get on each other's nerves, but Sullivan isn't a politicking general. He's not going behind George Washington's back trying to steal his job. His and George Washington's disagreements fall over how to win the battle, not necessarily who should be leading. This guy is a straight up
that's an
hardcore
important
soldier
distinction
that just wants to go in there, get the job done as effectively as possible. Once John Sullivan has his orders, he is a guy that just goes out there and gets it done. He can improvise on the fly, and he is hyper aggressive. He believes that having an imperfect plan that is executed immediately and violently is better than a perfect plan that takes a little while to figure out. And that is why George Washington...
It does depend on the scenario, but generally speaking, I get what he's saying, where sometimes just doing things is better than not doing things.
Washington comes to him with this mission to take over the bridge over the Assunpink and is like, look, I don't care how you do it, just fucking get it done, take this bridge. The third element of this attack wasn't going to be as vital, it was more or less going to be insurance. They were going to cross the Delaware River further south below the Assunpink River on the other side of the bridge from Sullivan. They were then going to occupy the road between Trenton and Bordentown, New Jersey, which was the nearest British outpost, which all the reinforcements would be coming from.
Again, I'm from New Jersey. Well, not just from New Jersey, I'm in New Jersey right now. I know all these locations, so it's always kind of interesting. That's actually one of the reasons I like Far Cry 3, despite what everybody else thinks, is because all the locations in Far Cry 3 are places I've actually been. Like, I know even the little regional areas they discuss. I know those places, so that's one thing that I always find fun when learning about the Revolutionary War, is they're talking about locations I actually physically know.
And if they ended up coming, their job was going to be to stop them, or if they couldn't stop them, at least harass and delay them and give Washington the time he needed to take over Trenton. And because this was not as vital, he would end up giving this job to General Cadwalader, who, while he was loyal to Washington, he also didn't have a great reputation for operating well under pressure. He was too conservative. But he was really the only other loyal guy around that was a general, so Washington basically more or less had to give him the job. So now he's got the leadership that he needs to the best that he could do. Now he's got to improve morale. He's got to get all of his men's hearts into this fight, and he's just brutally honest with them. He straight up just comes out and tells them, look, this is going to be victory or death. We're going to fucking win, or we're all going to die. Those are the only solutions. And that literally becomes the call phrase for the mission. Like different units operating in the darkness, you hear somebody off in the distance, you yell out a code word, and they respond back with the right code word. That way you know it's a friendly. The call sign that you yell out is victory, and the person responds with or death. And everybody's surprised. The men are actually fucking pumped because
this is one of those strategies that could go either way, really. Where sometimes, as I've said in the past, I said at some point in one of the videos we reacted to last week, where sometimes you do need to essentially burn the bridge behind you so that you say basically it's do or die. At the same time, that can completely demoralize you if that's how your mindset is, where you kind of have to think there's a reason to win. You have to think there's a chance of winning. Otherwise, it could completely blow up in your face.
this is the first time in their entire military career that they are going out on the offensive. They get to be the aggressor. Everything up until this point has just been them hunkering down and waiting for the big, bad, invincible British military to come get them and kick their ass. And this is the first time ever that they're going to roll up and they're going to do the ass kicking. So this is it. The game is set. It is victory or death. The American Revolution is going to get a win right here, right now, or it is going to die and we're going to stay British forever. Christmas Day, 6 p.m., 1776, all the head honchos are inside of a house. They're all looking at George Washington, Nathaniel Greene, Henry Knox, John Sullivan, General Cadwalader, all looking at him like, are we still going through with this crazy plan? Because
I will also say, this is completely unrelated to anything that is important in this story right now, but General Cadwalader, I swear that's the most British sounding name I have ever heard in my life. Like, if I wanted to make a fake British person to make fun of the British, I would probably call him Cadwalader.
Because not only is this plan crazy, there's now also a snowstorm outside. And George Washington issues the order. The weather doesn't matter. The clock is still ticking. We're going anyways. And you know what? Finding the silver lining, it probably adds to the element of surprise. Because now it's not just the Hessians thinking, surely the Americans wouldn't cross a frozen river on Christmas to kill us in our sleep. Now it's the Americans surely wouldn't cross a frozen river on Christmas in a snowstorm to kill us in our sleep. Right? Wrong.
That's actually another interesting point, is sometimes doing the tactically incorrect decision can result in tactical victories. Like, making certain decisions are good just because the enemy wouldn't expect you to do that decision. So the element of surprise outweighs the bad tactics of it, which is, you know, it's important throughout history. So sometimes when you look at something on paper, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But a lot of times they might have made that decision just because it didn't make a lot of sense. And also, my pause game is on point. That is a very funny still frame.
No, that's exactly what we're doing. Board the fucking boats. 7 p.m., they start ferrying guys across the river, and the weather just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. It's no longer just snow falling. It is sleet and freezing rain. Visibility is incredibly low, and it's getting darker and darker by the minute, and they've got nothing but lamps to light them up while they're crossing a frozen river, getting just pissed on by freezing rain. This slows everything down. It takes hours longer than it was supposed to for Washington and Sullivan's men to get across the river, and they are now hours behind schedule. They don't get all their men across the river until 1 in the morning. And as soon as they get all their men across the river, they receive word that Cadwallader's men weren't able to cross at all. So now it's just the two of the 3 elements that they wanted. The men are already freezing. They're going to have to walk 9 miles through this snowstorm to get to Trenton. They only have 2/3 of the men that they wanted, and 2 men fell off the boats and froze to death already, and the rest of the men are actively freezing to death. And George Washington considers turning back, but he realizes that under these conditions,
well, keeping them moving is probably what you need to do regardless.
Back across the river than it
just
is.
Because if they're already freezing to the point where it's causing health issues, you gotta keep them moving. Just get the blood flowing, potentially stave that off for a little bit longer.
Just to march to Trenton, and at least if they're marching, they'll be able to stay warm instead of sitting here waiting for their turn to hop on a boat. So that's it. We cross the point of no return. No matter how bad it gets, we have to keep pushing forward. It is quite literally victory or death at this point. They start marching to Trenton. And this march takes way longer than it's supposed to. The men are still pumped spiritually, but physically they are still starving, freezing. It's a snowstorm, it's dark, and all they have is lanterns leading the way. Obviously.
Yeah, so I don't know how many of you watching right now are in areas that get significant amounts of snow. Here in New Jersey, it can go either way. Sometimes it snows a lot, sometimes it doesn't snow like at all, but moving through heavy snow is a fucking chore. Like, it really is a slog. It's just not a fun time, especially if you're already tired. It's a real big drain on their physical well-being, like more so than he's really selling, but like moving through snow is not fun.
Washington and Sullivan's men split up because they're taking different routes to attack different spots on the town. Sullivan winds up sending a runner over to George Washington and is like, hey, our men are completely soaked with this freezing rain. All of our black powder's wet. We're not going to be able to shoot people when we get there. To which Washington replies, then use bayonets. John Sullivan, king of just getting the job done anyways, is like, okay, Roger, take over the bridge with nothing but pointy sticks. You got it. They don't make it to Trenton.
To be fair, spears throughout history have been like the weapon of war. It really wasn't until guns kind of became the norm that spears really fell off. And even then, they lasted until even in World War I, people were using bayonets because that basically turns your rifle into a spear. Spears are useful weapons. And if you're going to have melee weapons, you probably want to have your army equipped with spears. So, as ridiculous as it sounds, it's not that big a deal that they were using, as he says, pointy sticks, especially considering guns at the time were not as useful as they are today because, they're all black powder muskets. You fire one of those, and then you spend the next, 45 seconds reloading it. So it's not like today where you can fire 30 rounds from a rifle and then reload it in half a second and have 30 more ready to go. Back then, you shot once, and then you'd better have a moment to reload, or you're fighting with your pointy stick.
Till like 7:30 in the morning, the sun's already coming up, everything is going wrong. They're missing one of their 3 elements. The black powder's wet, the sun is now up when they were supposed to attack at the dark, and the Hessians didn't go and get drunk the night before, and they're all just sleeping. The perfect plan that we had has crumbled. It no longer exists. The only thing we have now is immediate and violent execution of whatever we've got.
Yeah, let's try some schoolyard bullshit.
So the Americans just attack it.
Longest Yard is another great movie. And that's the remake with Adam Sandler, but that's also a great movie. So I will say, I actually am quite impressed with myself that I'm actually recognizing all the movie references he's putting in here.
8 o'clock in the morning, there's very few guards out because, again, it's the day after Christmas and a snowstorm just ended. Surely the Americans aren't on their way, right? Wrong. All the guards get killed immediately. Henry Knox and his boys roll in there with cannons, set them up on the street. Everybody in town's been alerted from...
Okay, so I'm actually curious. I don't know if he's going to address this or not, but I would be curious if anybody in the chat or in the comments in the video after the fact Nick, Fat Electrician, mentioned that all their black powder was wet due to the freezing rain. Cannons also worked on black powder at the time. So he's setting up all these cannons. Were they actually functional? Or like, because again, if black powder, while it's a very volatile substance, it's very dangerous. If it's wet, it's not doing shit. So were those cannons actually able to fire and actually do their job? Or were they more of a psychological thing? Like, hey, I'm not going to rush that location because they have a cannon, even though it might not be functional. They don't necessarily know that.
Taking out the guards, Hessians start running out of the buildings in their pajamas with their guns, trying to figure out what's going on. They're getting lit up by canister shot from Henry Knox's artillery, so it's already chaos for the Hessians.
Okay, so it does seem like the cannons were functional. That also leads me to wonder, it's like, okay, so how fucked was their black powder supply if the cannons were still functional? Because they clearly had some black powder that could work. So were their guns actually as neutered as the Fat Electrician implied that they were? Also, this guy doesn't have a bayonet. That's should be noted. But yeah, ultimately, I'm wondering just how everything kind of adds together at this point.
The American infantry starts doing what the American infantry does, and they start deliberately targeting the officers so they can't give any of the men any orders. So it's just mass chaos for the Hessians.
Makes sense.
Absolutely everywhere. And then to make things even worse for the Hessians, some of the American civilians inside the town of Trenton start helping in the battle. One soldier had an account that he witnessed a woman from a second-story window shoot and kill a Hessian captain.
That's fucking hilarious.
Which is just poetry, because American
Lego
men
Batman,
don't engage in gentlemanly warfare, and American women definitely don't. Some of the Hessian troops wind up retreating across the bridge before Sullivan could take it, but ultimately he does wind up taking control of this bridge at about 8:30. So we are 30 minutes into this battle. America's already taken the bridge. They're kicking ass, and
bridges
Wall,
are bridges are important tactically. That's important to note. Taking a bridge is not like, oh yeah, by the way, they also took a bridge. It's they took a fucking bridge. That's going to affect who gets in and out.
Commander is just now getting out of his quarters. They went and woke him up the second the attack started, but you know, he had to go and get his uniform on and get his powdered wig because he's got to go win in style. So he comes out and it's just complete chaos. Men are scattered everywhere. All of his officers are fucking dead. He hops on his horse and starts rallying his men to this apple orchard right outside of town. So Colonel Rawls out there on horseback yelling orders. He's getting all of his men to this apple orchard, gets most of them there, starts getting them formed up, and then some random American, some fucking farm kid with a Kentucky rifle notices, oh look, a guy on horseback with a bunch of fancy shit on his outfit and a powdered wig.
Oh shit.
Shoot that guy.
So now Colonel Rawl, fatally wounded, basically orders his men to carry him back to his quarters and tells the rest of his officers, like, good luck, fucking figure it out. And by the time that unfolds, Sullivan already has cannons on the other side of the Assunpink River pointed at them on the apple orchard. Henry Knox has all the cannons moved around them on the other side, and it's just all the Hessians standing in the middle, surrounded by cannons and Americans, and they're forced to surrender.
Okay, I would have been interested in seeing the where this is on the map, because I'm not sure the actual orchard is mentioned on the map specifically. I might have to go back and look at that, but okay, I'm having a hard time piecing together just where everything is, because he mentioned it's on the other side of the river. They got the cannons pointed. Does that make sense as a mustering point then? I don't know.
When it was all said and done, 22 Hessians had been killed, 83 had been wounded, and they captured 900. The rest of them managed to escape across the bridge before Sullivan took it over. And the Americans, untrained,
I think that actually goes to show a lot of how effective this surprise attack was, that there were so many POWs compared to casualties. Because usually, it's kind of in a traditional battle, you fuck up the enemy, a lot of them die, a lot of them get hurt, and you capture the rest. In this case, they were caught so off guard that a couple died, a couple got injured, and the rest were captured because they just knew they weren't going to be able to put up a real fight.
disciplined inferior fighting force managed to suffer, let me check my notes, fucking 0 casualties.
Wow,
Okay, if you're not
that's
picking up what I'm
crazy.
putting down, the Hessians' MVP player was the frozen Delaware River. It's the only thing that took out any Americans in this entire operation.
And I will say, that's really fucking crazy to have 0. A low number, believable. 0 is insane, because casualties, people think of casualties, and they hear the word casualties, and they think deaths. That is not what a casualty is. It is deaths and injuries, or injured soldiers, essentially. So that means not only did nobody die taking this city, nobody got hurt taking this city. That means nobody fucking tripped and cracked their head on a wall, because that would probably be counted as a casualty. That means nobody got a shot off that hit an American. That was how effective that this surprise attack was, and I think it just reinforces what I was saying earlier. The fact that they took so many prisoners of war compared to casualties on the Hessian side just goes to show that it was a really effective surprise maneuver. Not that it was that devastating, but that they had basically won before they could get ready to respond. So yeah, I think that just really highlights that even more.
And to most people, that's it. That's a story of the famous painting of Washington standing up on a boat
But there's
crossing the
still
frozen Delaware River on
40%
Christmas
of the
to kill
video
his
to go.
enemies. There's literally an entire 90-minute movie about this entire battle. It's like my favorite Christmas movie ever. It's called The Crossing, and this is where they end
Okay.
the story.
I might
But
have
in
to watch
reality,
that.
this is where the story begins. So while most people in the story there, and they're like, oh, America had their first victory at Trenton, hooray, the revolution is saved. No, that's not how reality works, okay? A bunch of Hessians escaped across the bridge, and they're going to go tell the British, and now Cornwallis and General Howe aren't going to be able to go home and get laid. They're going to be super pissed off. They're going to come back with a ton of men and crush George Washington. So while everybody else is celebrating because America just got their first victory, George Washington is like, grab the supplies, pack your shit up. We're heading back across the Delaware right now. And that's exactly what happens. The men are dog-ass tired. They've been up all night. They just want a battle, but hey, George Washington says so. That's what we're going to do.
Okay, so I'm wondering, so I knew that the battle was primarily for morale purposes. The idea was to get a big victory and to basically send a message to your troops that there's still a chance at winning this thing, because that was the whole point. But I wonder, how much of a tactical advantage did they actually get from this? Because if they said, hey, we took the city, we fucked up the Hessians, and granted, they did take a lot of prisoners, which is very important. That means now they have about 1,000 fewer soldiers to fight with. But if they're going back across the Delaware, are they basically ceding the city back to the British? Which means they are no longer, essentially the morale was kind of the only real thing they got from it. And, the 1,000 Hessians that are no longer fighting. But, did they actually get a genuine tactical win from this battle, or is it just the reduction of enemy troops and the improval of your own morale? Again, somebody who knows more about the American Revolution maybe can sound off in the comments. That'd be cool to know.
Get all the supplies that they just captured. They pack all their shit up. They head back across the Delaware. At least now there's not a snowstorm going on. So they get back. Now Washington has to handle the fact that the clock is still ticking. Like, the enlistments still expire on December 31st at midnight, and now it's December 27th. And now Cornwallis, who's pissed off that he didn't get to go home for Britain for the winter and bang his wife, is marching towards them with 8,000 redcoats.
To be fair, I'd be upset about that too.
2,000-ish guys, and they all get to go home in 3 days. So if Cornwallis shows up and his army just dissolves overnight, he's not going to stand there with 8,000 guys and be like, oh, I guess we can all go home now. No, he's going to continue marching down to Philadelphia and squash the entire rebellion. If Washington can't figure out how to put up a defense right here, right now, it's still game over. So
I have to imagine that, I know he's kind of portraying things the way that he's doing, like the timeline of events, for the sake of storytelling purposes, because that's just kind of how Fat Electrician does things. He does things not just to tell the story of how a particular battle or whatever happens, but he's telling like an actual story along with it. Like, he's doing this for narrative purposes. I do understand that. I have to imagine that George Washington had a lot of this stuff thought of beforehand, because like, he knew that if he attacks Trenton and takes it in this manner, he knows there's going to be a response. Like, he knows that. There's no way he's just saying now, okay, now I've got to figure out something to do in response to this counterattack. I'm sure he had this planned out ahead of time.
Washington forms up his men and delivers a speech, and he basically lays it out how it is. He's like, look, you guys can go home if you want. I can't stop you. But if you guys stay, give me one more month. I will get all of you a $10 bonus from Continental Congress. I will get you paid. And if you give me one more month, we can fight and keep this rebellion alive. Otherwise, we're never going to have another shot like this. They're going to absolutely crush us if you guys quit right now. So they stay. They're freezing. They're starving. They're beat up. They're exhausted. But they stay. And as news spread...
Okay, so it doesn't look like he's going to say, I got to see what that equates to. So $10. So let's see, $10 in 1776 had roughly the buying power of $372 today. So, okay, so yeah, so it's a significant amount of money. Like, it's not nothing, but it's also not like life-changing money.
That America just actually beat the invincible British military at Trenton. He starts getting some more reinforcements, some more militias join under Washington. He gets some new recruits, and his troops go from 2,000 to approximately 4,000 men. It is now 4,000 untrained American colonials versus 8,000 redcoats under Cornwallis. The odds are getting better, but they're not looking that great. This is looking like America's going to get its ass kicked again. This is quite literally, yet again, victory or death. They got to figure out how to stop Cornwallis. And yet again, George Washington's back is up against the wall. He cannot decide whether or not he wants to take this fight. He has to take this fight. The only thing he can decide is where and how. So he decides they're going to go back to Trenton and they're going to set up...
I'm trying to see if they actually show the apple orchard. Doesn't look like they are, so okay, that's fine.
All their defenses on the bridge and force the British army to cross that narrow choke point while the American army is firing at them. Okay, strategically, this is brilliant. Funnel your enemies into a narrow choke point, light them up with cannon fire. Okay, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's how that is a common tactic for dealing with a larger opponent, is if you can, essentially funnel them into a single area, you can pick them off.
Metaphorically, also brilliant, because if you're going to make your last stand, fight, and die, there's no better place to do it than the ass in pink. Am I right? I tried so hard not to make that joke. I'm sorry.
Okay, to be fair, that was a pretty good execution of that joke. Like, I'll give it to him. That was funny.
So that's it. That's the plan. Washington and his men recross the Delaware for a third time. They start digging trenches. They're getting the cannons set up. They are getting ready to make their last stand. And George Washington goes over to John Sullivan and is like, John, I need you to take your best guys. I need you to go up the road where Cornwallis is coming from. And I need you to just harass the shit out of him and slow him down as long as possible. Okay, on one hand, like, why? Why does that matter? Why are we trying to slow him down? We're making our last stand. Like, we might as well do it during the daylight. I don't want to fight at night. But also, this is John Sullivan, the guy that just takes orders and accomplishes a fucking mission. So he takes his men and he goes and he does just that. So Cornwall...
yeah, and to be fair, again, while I have mentioned the fact that George Washington wasn't necessarily the greatest general, it is worth noting that, like, if you get a weird order and have some specifics attached to it, there's usually going to be reasons for the specifics. So if they want it specifically to happen later, there's probably a reason for it. And I feel like that guy, the general, would understand that much, to saying, hey, I may not know why he wants me to do this in this way, but he's being specific enough that he has to have a reason.
Is trying to march 8,000 redcoats down the road, and John Sullivan and his guys are just in the tree line taking pop shots at him the entire time. They launch an ambush. They dip. The British have to, like, turn, file ranks, go out into the field. They fire back into the trees. Turns into a whole 45-minute thing every time. And by the time they return fire, John Sullivan and his guys are already gone. They harass and delay him forever. Nobody really knows why we're trying to delay him, but, fuck it. George Washington said so, and he probably has a plan. So that's what we're doing.
Yep, that's basically what I just said.
So Cornwallis and his men make it to the Assunpink Bridge late afternoon on January 2nd. The Americans are there. They're ready. Cornwallis just launches full-on frontal attack against the bridge, and America mows them down. They retreat. He launches another full frontal attack. American cannon fire and musket fire mows them down again. They retreat. Cornwallis does a third attack. They get mowed down again. He lost somewhere between 150 and 365 men. Accounts from that day said the bridge looked like it was painted painted red.
Yeah,
with
that's pretty
British blood.
significant.
At this point, it's getting dark. The battle for the day is over. Both sides start getting their camp ready. They're going to camp down for the night, get ready. They're going to duke this out in the morning. That's what they're thinking. George Washington, on the other hand, has other plans in mind. And this is why he sent John Sullivan out to delay Cornwallis, because he wanted this battle to get broken up by nightfall so that he could pull off a pro-gamer move. Washington takes a couple of hundred guys and orders them to just spend the entire night building bonfires and making as much noise as humanly possible.
So, okay, I'm sure he's going to finish his thought in a minute, but like, sounds like sleep deprivation tactics. And that's something I've mentioned in the past, is that sleep deprivation is a motherfucker. If you can fuck with somebody's sleep, you fuck with their entire day. Like I've said in the past, the most afraid for my own life I've ever been has been driving tired. And that's just after one night of not enough sleep. Not having enough sleep completely screws you up. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's like a point where if you only get a certain amount of sleep, the impact to your cognitive abilities is like comparable to being drunk. So like, this is actually a really brilliant tactic, come to think of it. Which is crazy when you consider the fact that, again, George Washington was known to be a very good leader, but kind of a shit general.
Loud, have conversations, yell, build a bunch of fires, make it seem like there's 4,000 motherfuckers on this side of the bridge. And
okay, so I might have been wrong. So it's not sleep deprivation. It's it's basically, hiding the fact that your army is somewhere else. So I kind of talked out my ass. But yeah, okay, so I see what he's doing.
The rest of us are all going to take these tiny trails. We're going to go around Cornwallis to the town of Princeton, where he just came from. We're going to fuck up all his reinforcements and steal their supplies.
Okay.
Okay, that's the American plan. Cut back over to the other side of the bridge. Cornwallis is having a meeting with all of his officers, and they're trying to figure out what to do because they still might want to attack at night. And Cornwallis and pretty much all the other officers are on the same page of like, no, we're gonna attack in the morning. He's not gonna go nowhere. He's trapped. He can't go anywhere. We'll attack him in the morning. But there's one guy in that meeting, Sir Erskine. He's an officer, and he's like, no, we need to attack Washington right now. Have you guys not been paying attention? This is Washington's entire MO. He's done this like 15 fucking times, okay? We had him cornered at Rhode Island and we're like, we're gonna crush him in the morning, and then somehow he evacuated 9,000 men overnight and disappeared like a fart in the wind. Okay.
And of course, I imagine it's just this guy who's making all the sense in the world, he's just not gonna get listened to. That seems like a pretty common thing with a lot of these stories where there's one guy who actually kind of knows what he's talking about, but then the people in charge don't actually listen to him.
Okay, then he did the same thing at Fort Lee, and then he attacked Trenton out of nowhere. He's a slippery motherfucker. We need to go get him right now.
I have a gun in my room. You give me 5 seconds, I'll get it. Boom! I'll blow their brains out.
Scott, you just don't get it, do you?
But then Sir Erskine kind of looks like an asshole because when they look across the river, there's just more and more fireplaces popping up all over the place, and that's when Cornwallis says, we'll go over and bag him in the morning. Washington and his men start marching 12 miles around them to head up to Princeton. Yes, like the college. This is where the college is. They're going to attack Princeton University. They march all night long. When the sun's coming up, they're approaching Princeton. Cut back over to the British. Cornwallis and his boys wake up. They go over there, and it's just a bunch of dead fire pits everywhere. There's not an American in sight.
I fucking knew it! Oh!
Cutting back over to the Americans, as they're approaching Princeton, there's two roads going in and out, right? And the Americans are on one road, and there's 1,200 British reinforcements on the other road, and they're literally passing each other as America's entering Princeton, and they just kind of turn and look, and the fight breaks out right there. From here, it just turns into a giant shit show, right? They were marching on a road. They're not in battle formations. You've got John Sullivan and his men, and then Cadwalader and his men leading the way up front, and then George Washington's behind him. So John Sullivan and Cadwalader's men are the ones that engage first, and after a little while, the British start getting the better of Cadwalader's men, and they're breaking apart the two formations that John Sullivan and Cadwalader had set up, and they're about to split them in two, break the line, and crush the American forces.
And again, it is once again worth noting the fact that reloading took so long back then, where again, it took, between 30 seconds and a minute to reload your gun after you fire it. It's going to be a lot more chaotic than a comparable battle would be today, because again, you're not taking shots after shots after shots, messing up the enemy. You took one shot, then you had to kind of figure your situation before finding a time to reload or just going hand to hand. So again, I think Fat Electrician is doing a good job of setting the stage here. It is worth noting that just the consequences of certain positions are going to be different at the time.
Point, George Washington, leading from the front, rides in on his horse into the break in the American line and starts waving his men into battle to charge. And right as he gets out in the open and everybody sees, holy shit, that's George Washington, the British open up with a volley and just cover the entire battlefield in smoke. And George Washington disappears from eye view. And everybody just has the sinking in their stomach feeling of like, fuck, George Washington just died. That's it. But as the smoke dissipates, George Washington comes back into eye view, still on his horse, still waving his men into battle, and they follow and proceed to crush the British line.
You gotta wonder, because, you know, it would be a big morale hit if Washington had died at that point. What would have happened had Washington gotten shot? Because, again, they just got hit with a volley from the British. It very well could have ended him. Like, if a bullet happened to hit him, which, you know, the whole point of a volley is that you basically hit him with a wave of bullets, even though you couldn't necessarily accurately shoot each individual firing position, you could, again, just hit him with a wave, a wall of bullets. Stuff's gonna get hit regardless. So what would have happened if Washington got hit? I don't know.
With the British line fractured, some of the Redcoats turn, take off towards Trenton so they can reconvene with Cornwallis, and the rest of them are forced to retreat into Princeton University and take up occupation inside of some of the school buildings, and they barricade themselves inside. So the Americans roll in the cannons and just start lighting up Princeton University with cannon fire. Eventually, the British are...
So I do have to wonder, do they still have the canister shot from earlier? Is that what they're firing at the school? Because that is just not going to do as much structural damage as a typical cannonball. Because again, a cannonball is a big hunk of metal that blows holes in solid objects, whereas the canister shot is a bunch of smaller metal balls that blow holes in people, but don't necessarily blow a huge hole in solid objects.
Forced to wave the white flag out of these...
And no, humans are not solid, humans are squishy.
School building windows, and they are forced to surrender. And from here, George Washington has yet another decision to make because he knows that he is now in between Cornwallis and the Redcoats and their supply depot in New Brunswick, which is the biggest supply depot for the British Empire in the...
I used to live right next to New Brunswick, by the way. So again, these are places I know. I've been to New Brunswick hundreds, if not thousands of times. Like, I know that area.
Entire area. If he goes into New Brunswick and takes out that supply depot, it would be humongous. But also, that's exactly what Cornwallis is anticipating, and Cornwallis is for sure beelining it there as fast as he can because he does not want to lose this supply depot. Instead, Washington decides it's finally time to take up winter quarters, and he's going to be a dick about it the entire time.
That's great.
He marches his men further into New Jersey, into a place called Morristown up in the hills, which is heavily populated by people supporting the Patriot cause. It's also up in the hills. There's high ground all over the place. There's very few roads to get in and out. It is extremely easy for him to defend, and the British aren't going to be able to reach him there without taking a humongous amount of losses. More importantly, it's centralized in relation to all the other British outposts, so he has this impenetrable home base that's centralized. So from here, for the next 2 to 3 weeks, he just sends out raiding parties on all the British outposts and is relentlessly harassing them until they finally say fuck this, and the British pull out of New Jersey altogether for the winter. And when...
Well, I'll also, another thing it's worth noting, when it comes to asymmetric warfare, like that's what the U.S. Revolution was, the American Revolution, was a smaller American force fighting against a larger British force. One thing that's important to remember is that the wind conditions are different from either side. And a lot of times the smaller force in warfare, their wind condition is to be too annoying to continue to fight, where you don't necessarily have to annihilate the enemy. You don't necessarily have to win like the chess match. You just have to be enough of a nuisance that you're not worth beating anymore. And that's how a lot of things work. Like if you look at Vietnam, where if you look at the raw numbers, on paper, America won that just because they inflicted way more casualties than we took. At the same time, Vietnam's win condition was make the Americans fuck off And America's win condition was, total victory. And at the end of the day, America fucked off. So despite the numbers being not indicative of that, I would say the US did lose the Vietnam War. So that's kind of how the American Revolution was, where our goal was not necessarily to conquer Britain and to beat Britain entirely. It was for Britain to just say, you know what? It is not worth continuing this war. It is not worth trying to maintain control over these places. So that's an important thing to know, because being a nuisance can be just as effective as being an actual deadly military force.
When this news spread, thousands upon thousands of young men went and enlisted in the Continental Army. They got a ton of support from civilians. They got more food, more supplies, more everything. The entire revolution was a dying fire down to its last little red ember. And in its last moments, George Washington walked up with a fucking gallon of gasoline and poured it on top and turned it into a massive bonfire. The Battle of Trenton, Assunpink Creek, and Princeton all happened in the span of 10 days. And in that 10 days, George Washington proved to the entire world that the British military was not only not invincible, but that they could be beat. It is probably the only reason that you're not drinking tea from a kettle right now, and it is probably the most important 10 days in American history. So yeah, that is the full and real story of the famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware on Christmas. He didn't just cross it once, he crossed it 3 times, he handed out 3 separate ass whoopings, saved the American Revolution, and changed the world forever, and that is why he is the father of the United States of America.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, because I knew the story of Washington crossing the Delaware, the basic one. I knew that he went to do a surprise attack against the Hessians. That's about all I knew. But yeah, it's actually a very interesting story, and hearing the implications of it is fascinating. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Glad you could make it.
Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch.
And of course, he's going to have an afterward, so I'll wait to see what he says there.
Quack bang out. And you guys thought Die Hard was a good Christmas story.
Okay. So yeah, that was a good video. I really enjoyed that. As I said in the past, Fat Electrician doesn't really miss. He always gives interesting stories about things that I don't necessarily know a whole lot about. And Washington crossing the Delaware is definitely something I didn't really know a whole lot about it, aside from the very basics, and I didn't know what the implications were for the wider American Revolution. So I learned quite a bit today. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you for everyone who decided to watch that with me. For those in the chat, I am putting for those watching on stream, I'm putting the link in the chat again. Please do support the original creator. For those watching after the fact, I will be putting the link in the description below. Please do support the Fat Electrician. He allowed for this video you're watching right now to exist, and we always appreciate that over here. So yeah, for those watching on the highlights channel after the fact, just a couple more days, we'll have another video for you. Thanks for stopping by.